bodybuilding is way more than just muscles and stage poses. It's a sport built on sacrifice, grit, and a kind of discipline that borders on superhuman. Behind every jaw-dropping physique, there's a story full of sweat, pain, and relentless drive. But not all of those stories end on a high note. Some, in fact, turn into harsh warnings about how fame and poor choices can crush even the most promising dreams. In recent years, we've seen new names explode onto the scene, reaching success at lightning speed. Young athletes who, after just a few years in the game, were already racking up titles, landing million-dollar sponsorships, gracing magazine covers, and building massive fan bases around the world. That's the shiny side of bodybuilding, the part everyone wants. But there's also a darker side, one where a single wrong move can cost you everything. And it's exactly in that contrast that today's story fits. Paul DeMayo, better known by his nickname Quadzilla, looked like he was born for greatness. With insanely developed legs and an enviable physique, he quickly stood out as one of the biggest promises in the world of bodybuilding. His genetics, work ethic, and charisma had everyone convinced he could become a true legend in the sport. But there's a whole other life behind the spotlight. Beyond the photo shoots, trophies, and admiration lie silent struggles, mental pressure, unrealistic expectations, and a scene where the use of risky substances is, unfortunately, all too common. And it was in this environment that Paul's journey started veering off what once looked like a golden path. What makes a young, gifted athlete trade stages and trophies for darkness and self-destruction? Is talent alone enough to build a lasting career? Or is there something much deeper behind the downfall of athletes like Paul DeMayo? In this video, we're going to unpack it all, every detail of this meteoric rise and tragic fall. Paul DeMayo was born on September 12, 1967, in the quiet suburban area of Malden/Wakefield, Massachusetts. The oldest of three siblings, he grew up in a regular American family, far from the spotlight that would later define his life. His childhood was filled with everyday stuff, playing outside, going to school, and joining in on school sports. From early on, Paul was into contact sports. He played basketball and football, but he wasn't the strongest kid on the field. That started to bother him once he realized he'd need to bulk up to make a real impact in football. So at 14, he stepped into his school's weight room, not knowing that move would be the start of an intense and ultimately tragic journey. Paul's progress was nothing short of incredible. While most teens were still figuring out how to use a dumbbell, he was training with laser focus. By 18, he was already turning heads at 198 pounds, 90 kilograms, with 26-inch, 66 centimeters, thighs and a squat max of 507 pounds, 230 kilograms. It was clear he wasn't your average kid. His genetics and work ethic were creating something exceptional. His first big source of inspiration came from bodybuilding magazines. Rich Gaspari, an icon of the era and Arnold Classic champ, was one of the figures who lit a fire in Paul. He'd spend hours admiring the physiques of those pros, wondering if he could ever reach that level. That obsession fueled his workouts and sharpened his focus even more. That's when the nickname that would follow him forever was born, Quadzilla. His legs were massive for his age, cut, thick, and reminiscent of Tom Platz, the legendary king of legs. At local gyms, people couldn't stop talking about the kid with the freakish quads who looked like he was made for bodybuilding. But underneath all that physical growth was a young guy desperate to prove himself. Paul wanted respect. He wanted to show the world he could turn an ordinary body into something worthy of the spotlight. That mindset pushed him to train far beyond what was needed for football, transforming a search for strength into a full-blown love for bodybuilding. As his physique drew more and more attention, Paul knew it was time to hit the stage. In 1987, he entered the Massachusetts Championships in the teen division. He won his class and placed fourth overall, a huge achievement for a rookie. That trophy wasn't just a win. It was proof that he could go far beyond the school weight room. The next step? Raise the bar. In 1988, Paul competed in the Junior USA, a show with much bigger national exposure. He placed seventh, not a top finish, but every moment on stage was a lesson. Some would have been discouraged, but for Paul, it only added fuel to the fire. His journey followed a clear upward path. In 1989, he landed in fourth place. By 1990, he was third. And then came the breakthrough in 1991. Paul won the NPC Junior Nationals, edging out none other than Kevin Levrone by a single point. That one didn't just boost his confidence. It officially put him on the map in American bodybuilding. That same year brought another huge moment, the 1991 NPC Nationals. This was one of the most prestigious amateur competitions out there, stacked with future legends. Paul took third place, just behind Kevin Levrone and Flex Wheeler, but ahead of Ronnie Coleman, who'd go on to become an 8-time Mr. Olympia. That wasn't just a strong finish. It was a message. Quadzilla had arrived. That period marked a steady rise in confidence and continued physical growth. Every competition became a proving ground, not just for his physique, but for his mindset. Paul was still young, but already catching the attention of the media and major sponsors who saw in him a future icon. He had what every athlete dreams of: insane genetics, hardcore discipline, and a kind of natural charm that pulled in fans wherever he went. But along with success came pressure. Bodybuilding is a demanding world, and every podium finish raised the bar higher. Paul started to feel the weight of having to prove, show after show, that he wasn't just another promising athlete, but a future champion. That constant need for validation helped fuel his rise, but it would also be one of the forces behind his eventual fall. Paul DeMayo's early competitive career showed us a young man laser-focused on growth, rising fast, and facing off against the sport's toughest names. After proving himself in the junior and amateur circuits, Paul knew the next step was crucial. From 1992 to 1994, he set his sights on the NPC Nationals, the biggest and most prestigious amateur bodybuilding show in the US. This was the launchpad for many of the sport's biggest stars. But the road wasn't smooth. In 1992, Paul placed fourth, solid, but still not enough to satisfy his ambition. In 1993, he climbed to third, behind Chris Cormier and Mike Francois, two absolute beasts. That result hit him hard emotionally. Paul believed he had done enough to take the win. But rather than break him, that loss only fired him up even more. Finally, in 1994, all the years of brutal training and relentless discipline paid off. Paul dominated the NPC National stage, winning both the heavyweight class and the overall title, earning his IFBB Pro card. That was the golden ticket to the professional stage. In that moment, many believed he was about to become one of bodybuilding's next big stars. And with that victory came the perks of fame. Paul signed a sponsorship deal with meteoric, one of the biggest supplement companies in the game. He was the perfect marketing package, young, magnetic, and built like a Greek god. As part of the celebration, he was even handed the keys to a brand new Corvette, symbolizing what looked like the start of a life full of success and glory. The bodybuilding media quickly embraced the new champ. Magazine covers showcased his insane physique, especially those jaw-dropping legs that had become his trademark. Each appearance only reinforced the belief that Quadzilla could be a legit threat on the Mr. Olympia stage in the near future. To countless fans, he was the next big thing. At this point in his story, Paul was riding high. Motivation, fame, sponsorships, flashy cars, magazine spreads, he had it all. He had earned the respect of legends and looked like he was headed straight for the top. But what no one could see was that behind the confident smile, cracks had already started to form. Cracks that came from an impatient personality and a life increasingly weighed down by pressure and expectation. Then came 1995, the moment every bodybuilder dreams of: Paul DeMayo's debut at the Mr. Olympia, the most prestigious competition in the sport. And this wasn't just any Olympia. It would go down in history as the monster show, because never before had so many massive physiques shared the same stage. For Paul, this was the moment to prove that every drop of sweat, every grueling rep, and every extreme diet had been worth it. Standing 5 feet 10 inches and weighing around 250 pounds, 114 kilograms, Paul looked absolutely massive. But the Olympia stage is ruthless. Competing against legends like Dorian Yates, Kevin Levrone, and Flex Wheeler, he ended up placing 12th out of 16 competitors. For a rookie, that wasn't exactly a disgrace. But for Paul, who'd been hyped as the next big thing, it hit hard. The criticism came quickly. Experts pointed out that his back lacked detail and his overall conditioning was soft, missing the razor-sharp definition that judges expect at the top level. Paul had always favored size over sharpness, believing his sheer mass would make up for the lack of cuts and detail. But at the Olympia, size isn't enough. You need perfection. Trying to bounce back, Paul joined the European Grand Prix Tour, but things only got worse. He placed 9th in Germany, 9th again in Spain, and 10th in England. What was supposed to be the launch of a stellar pro career turned into a string of bitter disappointments. And the weight of it all started to crush him. Paul felt overlooked and defeated, like none of his hard work was getting the recognition it deserved. For someone with an explosive and impatient personality, that mix was dangerous. Instead of sticking it out, adjusting his weaknesses, and grinding forward, he made a drastic decision. He walked away from professional bodybuilding the same year he made his debut. After leaving the stage, Paul tried to start fresh, working as a personal trainer at the legendary Gold's Gym in Los Angeles. People still admired his physique, especially those iconic legs, but away from the competitive spotlight, the fire in his eyes started to dim. The passion that had driven him since age 14 seemed to be slipping away. It wasn't long before Paul's impulsive and volatile side became more visible. He didn't handle criticism well and often voiced his frustrations publicly, calling out judges and claiming he'd been robbed in competitions. In Paul's mind, success was supposed to come fast, just like it had during his amateur days. That impatience, paired with a lack of resilience, started leading him down a path that would change his life forever. With no competitions to focus on, Paul began feeling a dangerous kind of emptiness. What used to be structure and purpose turned into frustration and boredom. That's when he started turning to painkillers, not for recreation at first, but to keep training hard and maintain the intensity he was known for. It seemed harmless at the start, but it was the first step toward a deep fall. The regular use of pain meds brought temporary relief, but also built tolerance. Soon, the usual dose wasn't enough. The next step? Stronger drugs. That's how Paul ended up spiraling into hardcore substance abuse, including heroin, a decision that would completely derail his life. And as addiction took over, his personal life began to unravel too. His long-term relationship came to an end, and with it, he lost what many considered his emotional anchor. She had kept him grounded, away from temptations, and focused on something bigger than himself. Without that stability, Paul plunged even deeper into self-destruction. Far from the competition scene, he started living a life that was the total opposite of what fans imagined. Magazine covers still showed the champion, but in real life, he was caught up in parties, shallow relationships, and extreme excess. Moving to California only sped things up. He surrounded himself with people who enabled his addictions and impulses instead of helping him course correct. The fame that once seemed like a dream began to show its dark side. Paul became a prisoner of his own decisions, drifting further and further from the sport that had once saved him. His workouts lost intensity, the discipline vanished, and slowly, the bodybuilding world that had lifted him up started to feel like a distant memory. As Paul DeMayo's addiction deepened, his life unraveled at an alarming pace. What used to be a daily grind of training and structure turned into a desperate chase for the next fix. He was losing control, and the consequences were just beginning to show. To fuel his growing drug habit, Paul began stealing from his own family, taking cash and valuables from inside the house. In a heartbreaking moment that showed just how far he had fallen, he even sold his bodybuilding trophies, symbols of years of sweat and sacrifice, just to score money for drugs. It was the portrait of total self-destruction. As addiction consumed every part of his life, personal conflicts became unavoidable. His relationship with his longtime girlfriend completely collapsed, and Paul lost all emotional control. In a terrifying and extreme incident, he shot her during an argument, an act that led to his arrest and a 2-year prison sentence, made worse by drug possession charges. That prison sentence marked the point of no return. The young man once hailed as bodybuilding's next big star was now making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Whatever respect he had earned in the sport vanished. Former peers and fans looked at his story with sadness and disbelief. Meanwhile, the fame, the money, the sponsorships, all the things that once seemed untouchable, vanished. Sponsors bailed fast. Magazines that once featured his shredded physique stopped mentioning him altogether, and Paul faded into obscurity. In just a few short years, he had gone from the top of the sport to being completely forgotten. Life off stage grew darker and darker. Even after his release from prison, Paul couldn't get back on track. His drug use remained the center of his existence. Close friends and family had begun to expect the worst. Each day seemed to push him further down a bottomless pit. Paul's downfall is a textbook example of how impulsive decisions and addiction can destroy not just a promising career, but a life. And tragically, the worst chapter of his story was still ahead. The ending of Paul DeMayo's story is as heartbreaking as it is inevitable. On July 2, 2005, at just 37 years old, Paul was found dead in his room by his own father. It was a devastating moment for the family, but for many friends and loved ones, it didn't come as a shock. The young prodigy who once lit up the bodybuilding world had finally hit the end of his spiral. The official cause of death, a heroin overdose. It confirmed what many fans and fellow athletes had long feared. The addiction had won. The man who once stunned the world with his legendary legs and jaw-dropping build had become yet another tragic victim of drug abuse. Not long after his death, rumors and theories started to spread. Some claimed Paul had taken tainted heroin as an act of revenge. The story went that he had stolen pain meds from the mother of a local dealer, and the deadly dose was a form of punishment. These stories were never officially confirmed, but they circulated through the media and among those close to him. Some even whispered about possible homicide, raising doubts about what really happened that night. But confirmed or not, the painful truth remained. His fate was sealed by the choices he made, ones rooted in addiction, recklessness, and dangerous relationships. One of the most powerful accounts from that time came from Greg Valentino, a close friend of Paul's. In interviews, Valentino spoke openly about how fame and toxic influences dragged Paul into the abyss. Losing his long-term girlfriend, his anchor, sent him spiraling into a lifestyle of non-stop partying, hard drugs, and shallow connections. And once he was in that world, he couldn't find his way back. Valentino also shared that family and friends had already been bracing for the worst. Paul's behavior had become so self-destructive that everyone knew he was living on borrowed time. His death was a tragedy, but sadly, it wasn't a surprise. Paul Quadzilla DeMayo's story is both inspiring and heartbreaking. Inspiring because it shows how far genetics, drive, and passion can take an athlete. But heartbreaking because it proves that talent alone isn't enough to sustain a career or save a life. Paul had what most would call the full package. But even that couldn't protect him from the consequences of poor decisions and a life pulled off course by darkness. Today, he's remembered as a wasted genetic marvel, someone who could have reshaped the history of professional bodybuilding if he'd managed to stay focused and grounded. His legs are still legendary among fans and competitors, but what truly defines his story is the brutal contrast between what he could have been and how it all ended. More than just an impressive physique, Paul's story has become a powerful warning for future generations. A reminder that chasing success too fast, without emotional maturity, can be poison in disguise. That fame can be deceptive, and that the use of substances, which are sadly all too common behind the scenes in this sport, can destroy an entire life in just a matter of months. How many other athletes can you think of who are walking that same path, even today? The pressure, the need for instant results, the constant comparison with other competitors, it all builds up. And if there isn't a strong foundation, emotionally, with family, or spiritually, the fall might not just be likely, it might be inevitable. If this story hit you in any way, drop a like down below. It helps this video reach more people who need to hear this message too. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, we bring you real, well-documented stories with messages that hit deep, just like this one. Want to support our work even more? Become a channel member. It's a direct way to help keep this production alive and be part of a community that values not only the sport, but also the truth behind it. And now, if you want to dive into more intense stories like this one, click the video that's showing up on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. I'll see you there. Big hug, and until the next video.